Jeffery Lurie deserves the most credit for the Philadelphia Eagles' ability to constantly maneuver the salary cap and keep their core intact. I'll tell you why coming up on this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, whether you're listening in Philadelphia, Texas, Italy, doesn't matter. Thanks so much for making us a part of your Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. The Philadelphia Eagles are busy at work this offseason. They've released Darius Slay and James Bradberry, the former elite cornerback tandem of the 2022 Super Bowl run. It's now time for a new era featuring Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. The Eagles kept Saquon Barkley on a long-term contract yesterday, agreeing to a new 2-year extension. And although it's not a lot of new money, but more guaranteed money, I do see a lot of Eagles Twitter, or non-Eagles Twitter, I should say, going how are the Eagles doing this? How are they doing this with a salary cap where every single time you say, well, they can't do this and this and this because there's a cap, the Eagles find a way to do it. I need you guys to sit down for this. For any non-Eagles fans that are watching or responding to all these things on X and wondering how the Eagles are doing this and how their team isn't. Buddy, the salary cap, can I call you buddy? The salary cap, it's just an excuse. It's an excuse for cheap billionaire owners to stay cheap billionaire owners. Your owner does not want to front the bill. He does not want to give up liquid cash in the form of guaranteed money up front to backload contracts, to spread cap hits around, to create void years, to take on dead money hits in the future. Your owner does not want to do that in the name of winning. That's just a simple fact. That is what Jeffery Lurie is doing for the Eagles. It's why he deserves more credit for the Eagles' success than maybe anybody, even over Howie Roseman. Howie is able to do what he does because Jeffery Lurie is willing to front the bill. He prioritizes winning, keeping his players, doing right by them over doing right by his pockets. Because he's going to be fine no matter what. That guy's going to be a billionaire whether he does this or not. He cares about winning. He cares about his players. Howie Roseman, yes, he is a cap wizard. But again, his ability to spread things around, it gives Saquon Barkley more guaranteed money. The most guaranteed money a running back has had in NFL history, not just franchise history, but league history. His ability to be creative with roster building, it's because he has an owner like Jeffery Lurie that's willing to give cash up front in guarantees to his players. Jeffery Lurie in December sold 8% minority stake in the Philadelphia Eagles, minor ownership, so he could have more liquid capital to do things like this, to give Saquon Barkley more money, to have the flexibility to have this core intact, to me, one of the greatest teams assembled in NFL history, and also have the flexibility to go keep Zack Baun, maybe one of Milton Williams or Josh Sweat, maybe trade for Myles Garrett. He sold 8% of minority ownership in the Eagles back in December. The Eagles are now valued at $8.3 billion. On top of the team bringing in $600+ million a year in revenue, they can do this. And your team can too. But Jeffery Lurie is one of the few owners willing to do this, and it's why I think he deserves more credit for the Eagles' success than he's getting. And when you talk about who's responsible for this golden era of Eagles football, 3 Super Bowl appearances and 2 Super Bowl victories in under a decade. Of course, Howie Roseman's the number one guy that we say is the most consistent variable of that run. But without Jeffery Lurie fronting the bill, Howie Roseman, it's like when you're a rich kid, right? And you can go out there and start your own company, and maybe it becomes a success. I'm going to make a Marvel analogy. Tony Stark was a success. He was the hero that saved the MCU, defeating Thanos. Stark Industries became an incredible company in this fictional world. But without Howard Stark, without pretty much Dad having the money, Tony Stark is never Tony Stark. Howie Roseman, without Jeffery Lurie, doesn't have the money. The money helped Howie create his greatness, his own form of greatness, but he needed Jeffery Lurie's money to do it. And there's a lot of owners out there, Jerry Jones, the Cincinnati Bengals, who are being called out by their franchise quarterback, pressuring publicly. Joe Burrow is the Bengals because he knows their history and he knows they need to keep T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. The Eagles don't need to worry about that ever. Like, they don't ever have to have Jalen Hurts pressuring Jeffery Lurie to keep A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Saquon Barkley and to pay your offensive line and to bring in defensive stars. And when those guys earn bigger contracts, to give out more guaranteed money to spread things out. Jeffery Lurie does that. And it's why he's one of the most essential pieces of the Eagles' success, if not the most essential, because he's the one signing the checks. And yes, the salary cap is not fake. Eventually, these cap hits, like, they do come up. It's like credit. Eventually, the salary cap high hits will come, the dead money too. You got to be right with these players that you're doing this for, as there's very little wiggle room when those cap hits do come knocking. Outside of more extensions, kicking the can down the road even more, there's very little wiggle room in the form of trading these players, cutting them. There's a lot of dead money, and you do not free up a lot of salary cap space. So you got to be right about these players. It's why when Howie did this with like Alshon Jeffrey back in 2018, it did not work, and it was a disaster. So you have to be right like they've been over the past few years. But at the same time, even if there is a lot of these high cap hits that are coming, if there isn't another pandemic, the salary cap is going to continue to rise, and that makes those hits, when they do come up, not affect this team nearly as bad, because the salary cap's going to rise. They're only going to make more and more money in revenue. You can, again, if the owner is willing to do this consistently, even when those salary cap hits start to rise, you can do new deals with other players that are backloaded themselves, and then you kick the can down the road in the future for those contracts when the current contracts have those higher hits. So some people think this is not a sustainable strategy. As long as Jeffery Lurie doesn't go broke, it kind of is, as long as he is willing to do this. And again, a lot of NFL ownership, even though they're billionaires, are not willing to do this. It's not a hard salary cap in the NFL like it is in, let's say, the NHL, where it's a very hard salary cap. Here's how much you can spend. There is very little to no wiggle room at all, which is not great because a lot of players are severely underpaid in that kind of structure. Is the NFL set up like the NBA with a luxury tax, or like the MLB where there's no cap at all? No, but it's a soft cap. And when you look at it that way, the salary cap, paying your quarterbacks big contracts, all they are excuses for your owners to not have to spend money to continue to win, to continue to spend money on to continue to prioritize winning. And Howie Roseman, he deserves all the credit in the world, too, for taking that money and making it work. Like, I think I said it the other day when he cut Darius Slay, Howie Roseman has learned from the past not to reward players for past performances. Don't pay a guy for what they've done. Pay them for what they're going to do. But certain circumstances do call for rewarding players, and it's good business to give Saquon Barkley that money. Like, he was already severely underpaid heading into 2024. Like, he was getting paid like Darnell, like a wide receiver 2, a Darnell Mooney, or a wide receiver 3 like Gabriel Davis. But then he had the greatest season a running back has ever had. It's good business to reward your players for historic performances when they do everything the right way, become a leader. You know, he was selfless to a fault. Saquon could have had the NFL rushing record, but Nick Sirianni and the Eagles wanted him healthy for the playoff run. He supported that. When there were times that they pulled him out of games against the Giants where he could have went for the kill, went for records against his old team, and instead Kenneth Gainwell scoring touchdowns. He's celebrating with Kenneth Gainwell. He's celebrating with Will Shipley. Saquon's done everything the right way. And he helped you win a Super Bowl. He's the main reason you won a championship. It's good business to reward somebody like that. And it shows players around the league that this is definitely a team that you want to play for. And it really wasn't much more money cap-wise. Like, they just guaranteed all the money that was on his original 3-year contract. And I do think this isn't just paying him for what he's done. I think Saquon Barkley still has 2 to 3 elite years ahead of him if they can keep him healthy, if they don't give him the historic usage rate that they did in 2024 in 2025, in 2026. As I said on yesterday's show, they have to create more balance between the pass game and the run game this year. They can't be nearly as inconsistent passing the ball as they were last year. But I think this was good business from Jeffery Lurie and Howie Roseman to pay Saquon Barkley. Howie deserves a lot of credit, but the Eagles owner, Jeffery Lurie, I think he deserves more credit than anybody. Will Zack Baun be one of the guys that Jeffery Lurie and Howie Roseman give more money to? What's plan B at linebacker if they don't keep Baun? We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by Chewy. I know MJ is excited for this one. Chewy, I'm sure you've all heard of it before. They really do have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products for all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. It's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, which he wants, fish, reptiles, small pets as well. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics. I'm going to try to cover her ears when she hears vet, but I digress. Rolling out nationwide, AutoShip is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out. You can easily change or cancel it anytime. Chewy has really made managing pet care a lot easier for me. MJ is my first pet I've ever had on my own. I never run out of essentials through Chewy. Easy access to vet care and everything delivered right to your door. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See the site for complete details. All right, guys, we're back here on the second segment of a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us a part of your day, your first listen each and every day, Monday through Friday, even through the offseason. We continue now our offseason options series, looking at the linebacker position. And plan A, plan B, and plan C for the Eagles at linebacker, especially with Nakobe Dean's injury, which is going to keep him out for, I think, a lot of the 2025 season, considering the timing of that injury. Probably will be back at some point throughout the second half of the year. But even if Nakobe Dean was healthy, their second, third, fourth plan outside of plan A, like, it needs to be keeping Zack Baun. They need to pay Baun over anybody this offseason. The only way I could really stomach them losing Baun is if, like, they justified it by saying we were going all in on trading for Myles Garrett and need to save resources, need to save money to go out and get an alpha like that. And then if they added another kind of linebacker in free agency that was a solid name, or they used a high draft pick, like if they traded down and then took Jahad Campbell from Alabama. Okay, there is some scenarios if Baun wasn't in Philadelphia that I could understand, but there's very little wiggle room there. He is the only guy that I'll be upset. Like, I'll understand if Milton Williams isn't back, or Josh Sweat, or any free agent really, but Mekhi Becton, if Zack Baun's not back, I'm not going to be happy about it. And I don't think he's going to get Fred Warner money. And I also don't think he was a fluke last year. Like, I think Zack Baun finally found the right defense under Vic Fangio. He was moved back to the right position that was able to tap into his potential. Is he going to be a first-team All-Pro linebacker every single year? I'm not sure. I mean, it's going to be hard to sustain the success he had last year. He was the best linebacker in football when it comes to forcing turnovers, when it comes to his run defense, when it comes to being the best coverage linebacker in the NFL. I mean, he was incredible. He was your green dot play caller when Nakobe Dean went down. He was an incredible leader. Like, he was the glue of them. He was just the middle of that defense, the spine of the number one ranked defense in football. And yet I don't think he'll get Fred Warner money. So I just don't want to hear the excuses about how Howie Roseman didn't keep Zack Baun, like why he didn't do it. I don't want to hear it. I think, yes, is he going to get paid on the open market? It's going to raise his value, of course. Howie's going to have to pay more money than he ever has had to at linebacker if he wants to keep Baun. But I don't think it's going to be this $17 to $20+ million contract. I really don't. I think when you look at what Milton Williams is going to get, what Josh Sweat's going to get, heck, even what Mekhi Becton's going to get on the open market, even though Zack Baun, you could say, is a better player in his position than those three guys, they're all going to get far more money because of the position they play. So I have very little wiggle room when it comes to understanding why Zack Baun would not be back in Philadelphia next year. They need to make it work. I do not want to see a 2023-like scenario happen where in 22 they have two strong starting linebackers, TJ Edwards and Kazir White. Howie lets both leave, and then we got to watch Zach Cunningham out there and Shaq Leonard. I just do not want to see that in 2025 where there's two new starters at linebacker because you did not pay Baun and Nakobe Dean is injured. But let's say that does happen. Let's say Howie Roseman does what he normally has done throughout his career, and he says, I've done it before, I can do it again, especially with Vic Fangio as my defensive coordinator. Who are some alternative options, I guess, plan B, plan C, to Zack Baun? Well, one option that you have in-house is re-signing Oren Burks, which I think you should do anyway. I think that should be a priority. Like, outside of the big four, top four names the Eagles have in free agency with Sweat, Williams, Becton, and Baun, I think keeping Isaiah Rodgers and Oren Burks is very important. Especially with Darius Slay gone, you want Rodgers back to compete with Ringo. With Nakobe Dean injured, with Baun potentially departing in free agency, bringing back Oren Burks should be a priority. Even if you bring back Baun, I would like to re-sign Burks. He was, I think, really good in the playoff run when Nakobe Dean went down. He's not going to cost too much. Oren Burks should be somebody you re-sign regardless of what happens this offseason at linebacker. So that's definitely an option, and I think that's something the Eagles will prioritize. If they go outside the organization, who are some other free agents not named Zack Baun, some cheaper options that they could target? This guy I don't think is going to be cheaper long-term, but if the Eagles want to continue this year-by-year, figure-it-out type of approach at linebacker, I think Dre Greenlaw, the guy that punched Big Dom from the San Francisco 49ers, could be an interesting option if he does want to sign a one-year prove-it deal. Greenlaw, of course, we remember he tore his Achilles in Super Bowl 58 against the Kansas City Chiefs, played sparingly last year, then was shut down eventually at the end of the year. But Greenlaw is still young. When he was playing, I thought was one of the most underrated linebackers in football because he was playing next to Fred Warner, which of course I'm sure helped. But he was kind of the Nakobe Dean for the 49ers defense, like one of the unheralded heroes of the 49ers Super Bowl defense back in 2023. So I think he'll still command a pretty competitive market. I think if teams are willing to spend big on Greenlaw and it's a multi-year deal, I think the Eagles will be out on that because at that point his value will be similar to Zack Baun and you might as well keep on. But if Greenlaw does kind of want to bank on himself and sign a short-term prove-it deal and go somewhere that's not San Francisco, I'd be interested in a one-year prove-it deal with Philadelphia. I don't know if he has to make amends with Big Dom and the Eagles' Italian mob of an organization that they have built right now, but Greenlaw would make some sense in the scenario where he's looking to sign a short-term deal and then banks on his value rising in the 2026 free agency pool. If they want to go year by year at linebacker and let Zack Baun walk, some older veterans might make sense and not the shot players of like a Zach Cunningham or a Shaq Leonard, but some guys that still have the juice. If they want to go on a short-term deal with a veteran that's looking to win maybe another ring before they retire, I could see Tampa Bay Buccaneers linebacker Lavonte David. I could also see Washington Commanders linebacker Bobby Wagner. Those are two players that are over the age of 30, but they're still very effective. And again, if you don't want to do anything more than a one-year deal at linebacker and just keep figuring it out offseason after offseason because you're going to pay every other position and you got to sacrifice somewhere and you're going to choose linebacker to be the sacrificial lamb, I could see Lavonte David. I could see Bobby Wagner, who had a pretty good year in Dan Quinn's defense with the Washington Commanders. Like, he still has the juice. I could see one of those two players as well. But again, you guys know many times I've said on this podcast, these would all be like plan D and E and F for me. Like Zack Baun, they need to keep Zack Baun. Let me reiterate that again. Zack Baun should be an Eagle, not Dre Greenlaw, not Lavonte David, not Bobby Wagner. But there are some interesting options if Baun does, I guess, outprice his Philadelphia market. I think there's a couple other like smaller names you could think of. Kazir White's a free agent again. Maybe a reunion with White makes sense. Not an overall flashy player, but a solid guy that you're not going to have to worry about too much. He'll probably not cost a whole lot coming off of that deal with the Arizona Cardinals. Terrell Dodson, somebody interesting that I covered with the Buffalo Bills a few years ago. Good coverage linebacker, inconsistent but a splashy playmaker. Had 3 interceptions down the stretch last year when Miami picked him up once Seattle let him go. I think he's an interesting option. And then Jamian Sherwood from the Jets. He's a safety to linebacker conversion. Played well in place of C.J. Mosley. So there are some options if they want to go cheaper than Baun, if they want to continue this year-by-year approach. But Howie Roseman just gave out the most money that a team has ever given out to a running back. I would like him to continue this trend of doing things he normally doesn't by now turning around and giving a linebacker a multi-year deal because the Eagles defense needs it in 2025, especially with Nakobe Dean's injury. They need Zack Baun. Could another option to replacing Dean temporarily in 2025 be through safeties, using more 3 safety looks? Who could they add next to Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship? I'll get into that as we wrap up this Wednesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, so Nakobe Dean's going to be out for a while, as I mentioned, in 2025. And even if he wasn't, I do want to see more defensive back heavy packages next year in Vic Fangio's defense. I'd like to see more 3 safety looks, some more dime packages. Look, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship, they are 2 of the most underrated pieces of that Super Bowl season. They had 10 of the Eagles' combined 13 interceptions last year. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson had 6 picks, pretty much emulating exactly what he did for the Eagles in 2022, if not more. He was a better leader this time around. He was a better tackler. He was a better player against the run, and he was still the ball hawk that he was in 22. Reed Blankenship, I thought, was one of the most underrated players on your team. 4 interceptions, just solid. Like, is he an elite player? No. But kind of like what I was mentioning with Kazir White at linebacker, with Reed Blankenship, you just never really have to worry about him. Like, you don't have to hear his name a whole lot unless he's making a clutch interception in the fourth quarter. Just a solid player, solid tackler, really good ball hawk, knows for turnovers. Is he the greatest one-on-one coverage safety against tight ends? No. Zach Ertz showed that in the NFC Championship game. But that's, to me, like your most underrated part of your defense is your safety tandem with CGJ and Blankenship. Again, 10 combined interceptions last year for the 2. But I could see both wanting raises. I could also see the Eagles wanting to use more 3 safety sets. And I'm interested to see who that third safety would be. Sidney Brown is a player that I'm very intrigued by. This is a very big offseason for Sid heading into year 3. It's going to be over a year removed now from that torn ACL. So he's going to be fully healthy this offseason. I love his ability, his physical traits. He is so explosive. He flies around like a rocket, like a chicken with his head cut off. His physicality, like that fight against the Dallas Cowboys, was awesome. I thought he was really good this year as a gunner on special teams. Like, he has a very high ceiling. That's why the Eagles took him in the 3rd round in 2023. But as I mentioned, right now, he kind of, him flying around sideline to sideline, he has that range, which is good for a safety, but he uses it like he's a chicken, as I said, with his head cut off. And I don't think Vic Fangio trusted him a lot in 2024. It's why you saw many times spelling for CGJ and Reed Blankenship, you saw Tristan McCullum over Sidney Brown. McCullum played over Sid in spots a lot. Like, he was the 3rd safety in 2024. I think Fangio didn't trust Sid because, number one, he was still recovering from that injury. He was getting back to full health. But also, I think Sid has to control himself more. Like, he has to find a way to control that range, that speed, that fire in him to just take somebody's head off. There were a lot of times last year and even in 2023 where he was undisciplined in over pursuing. I think, the rush lanes. I think he was undisciplined with missed tackles. Again, having that kind of speed, that power, that ability to just fly coming downhill. We've seen some huge hits from Sid over the last 2 years. Like, it can be a positive, but I don't think he really knows how to control it yet. It's like a superhero in their, teen era where they just got their powers and they have no idea how to use them yet. Like, that is what Sidney Brown is right now. And I think that's why this is a very important offseason for him to mature, for him to slow his game down mentally So he can use that ability, that range and speed and physicality, but at the same time, he's not over pursuing. He's not missing tackles. He needs to find a way to control it more if he wants to have a chance to play more in 2025. If the Eagles do want to look outside the organization to add a third safety next to Blankenship and CGJ, I think the draft is the way to go. I could see them with the 32nd overall pick or trading down to round 2 or trading up in round 2 and going for like a, Malachi Starks is going to be a first-round pick out of Georgia, but I could see him as an option at 32. Daniel Jeremiah actually had Starks as a mocked pick to the Eagles at 32. I could see Nick Emenwari, who you guys know I talked about on Mock Draft Monday, the South Carolina cyborg safety, 6'3", runs a 4.4 flat. If they want to draft him at 32 or trade down a little bit, I could see those as options to make your defense more multiple, more versatile. By adding that third safety, you really don't have that kind of player, like a Nick Emenwari type. Are there any free agents? I don't love the class. I'm not going to really invest a lot of money here because I do think Chauncey and Reed are eventually going to want more money. I think both will see that Saquon got more money and they're like, hey, where's my cut? Like, we're underpaid. And I think they both are pretty underpaid right now for the production they had last year. So I don't think they're going to invest a lot of money in safety and free agency. One player that I really like, and it's why I like Nick Emenwari, I want that linebacker / safety kind of tweener, that in the box lengthy player that you can move all across the formation. Jeremy Chin. Jeremy Chin was my guy of the Locked On Eagles podcast back in 2020. He was the pick the Eagles were going to make if they didn't select Jalen Hurts. Like, he was their second favorite option in the second round that year. He's in the box, again, versatile linebacker safety tweener. Thought he had a bounce back year last year in Dan Quinn's defense with Washington. He'd be the one guy I know the Eagles they liked in the past, and that I'm a big fan of, that would make sense for what I think they could use personnel-wise on defense. Outside of Jeremy Chin, though, I think if the Eagles were to add another safety to compete with Sidney Brown as that third guy, I would predict it would probably come through the NFL draft. But that is an option. Again, even if they bring back Zack Baun and they re-sign Oren Burks, I don't know if they're going to want Burks to be an every down player all the time. He had a great playoff run, but do we trust he's going to be great for really reliable for 12 plus games or whenever the time span is until Nakobe Dean comes back? I'm not sure. Another option can be, let's run more 3 safety packages. Let's get more of a physical safety in the box, like a Chin and Emenwari. Let's get Sidney Brown to develop that way in year 3, and we go with more dime looks. Like, I think that's an alternative option while Nakobe Dean recovers from injury. But it'll be interesting to see what they do just in the secondary in general this offseason, because Howie went so hard in the paint in the secondary last offseason. I'm curious to see what he'll do with that spot at safety and at corner next week when free agency starts and when the NFL draft rolls around in a little over a month. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with my guys Damian Parsons and Keith Sanchez, getting you ready for the 2025 NFL Draft Monday through Friday. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.